Hey, welcome to Being Integrated. My name is Jude, and this video is about Buddhist psychology and how it can help us, what it can do for like normal non-Buddhist people. So I'm a therapist. I've studied many different modalities of psychotherapy, and I practice with clients. And I've also been studying Buddhism for quite a long time. My parents are actually Buddhist, and I started studying about 17 years ago on and off with different teachers and different traditions. So Buddhist psychology is like a huge topic. There are so many traditions, there are so many texts, there are so many ways of looking at it, but there are some universal aspects. There are some things that are universal to Buddhism itself, regardless of the tradition. And this video is going to explore what those core ideas are and how that's relevant to us, how it's relevant to all people. And I think it really is. It really addresses some of the challenges we face universally as humans. That's the beauty of it, is that these are kind of these universal truths or universally helpful ideas to contemplate. So this is not a comprehensive video, this is not an academic video, this is just looking at what are the practical ideas that we can implement ourselves, what can we learn as normal people from Buddhism that's going to be really helpful in our lives. So at the core of Buddhism is what they call the Four Noble Truths, which is really universal in all lineages of Buddhism. You come across the Four Noble Truths as really what it's all about. The first noble truth is that all life is permeated by suffering, or as the Pali, the original language of the texts, it's called dukkha. And dukkha has been translated into suffering, but it's not really a perfect translation. It's more around unsatisfactoriness. So the first noble truth of Buddhism is really saying that life doesn't really satisfy. We're never really satisfied or fulfilled by what's happening. We may have really good times, we may feel really great, but ultimately we come back to this feeling of not being fully satisfied. And then the second noble truth goes on to teach that suffering or unsatisfactoriness comes from attachment. It's that we naturally get attached to things. The teaching is really that we have an aversion to discomfort. We don't like discomfort. We try to avoid it. And that we cling to, or that we try to create more pleasurable experiences. So it's this aversion towards our experience. It's the fact that, we're unsatisfied and we don't like it, that we try to avoid it. We try to move constantly to find more fulfilling activities or experiences. That's what they teach the suffering comes from. And then the next lesson is something that's often misunderstood, which is that we can overcome all of this. We can overcome all this suffering through acceptance or through non-attachment, through really opening to our experience as it is without trying to avoid the discomfort. So it's really learning to sit with discomfort and accept and open to the discomfort fully, to fully surrender to it and to not try to escape it anymore. And if we can do this on a really deep level, if we can really practice this over time and open layer by layer to all the levels of discomfort and not try to grasp towards the comforts and the pleasurable experiences, then our experience shifts. We overcome the aversion, clinging habits of the mind, and we could actually find any experience fulfilling. Even the really uncomfortable experiences can be fulfilling. So this often gets interpreted that we have to renounce pleasurable experiences or totally give them up. And while there is some weight to this idea, like it does exist, and a lot of monks obviously give a lot up, it's not really truly what Buddhism is about, and that's not really what the teaching is about. The Buddha actually came from this time where asceticism, which is giving up desire, giving up pleasure, giving up all good feelings, that was the dominant way of spiritual practice. That's how the holy men were practicing to really give up as many comforts as possible, to free one from that grasping, from the desire. And that was seen as kind of the noble way of the time. And the Buddha did this, but had this realization while he was meditating once he had given up pretty much all his food. Apparently he was eating like a grain of rice a day. And he realized it's actually not about giving up the good feelings. It's actually about not being attached to them. So you can let all the good feelings come. You can enjoy things. You can do things that you like to do. But we have to work on being attached to them. So let's say we plan a nice camping trip or something. We're really looking forward to it. We have all of our friends together. It's going to be a really great time. And then suddenly it rains and it gets canceled. Then obviously we're unhappy. We might get really sad or angry. And that's because we got attached to this idea that this was going to happen. There was this attachment that, okay, this is what the future is going to look like. This is how things are going to turn out. And when we come to expect it, there's always going to be grief or pain or anger when it doesn't work out. So the idea in Buddhism is that we can still do things, we can still plan to have nice times, but we have to practice being open to whatever happens. And that means that, if our camping trip gets canceled and we're sad, we're also open to that sadness. And through the opening layer by layer, whenever things don't work out, if we practice opening to the experience and feeling whatever pain or sadness is there, it becomes less intense over time. It becomes less overwhelming. With this practice of opening to our experience, we become less reactive. So we're all very reactive. Of course, something happens that we don't like and it brings up a lot of feelings. The key to being less reactive is not stifling our reactivity, but it's actually opening to it fully. Being fully open to the experience allows us to move through it. And then next time or in future instances, the reactivity is not going to be as strong. And if we really diligently practice being open to our experience, which means probably going on meditation retreats and really challenging ourselves to be with discomfort and to be fully open to it, it changes the way we experience the world. It changes the way we experience pain and discomfort and all of our feelings. And they become less problematic. They become less overwhelming. They become less painful. Shinzen Young, one of the main teachers I study, says, we feel it more, but it hurts less. And that really sums up what Buddhism is all about, is that we're more open to our experience. We feel things more, but the pain element, the suffering element is a lot lower. And this happens over time. It takes time for it to happen. This is why they call it practice. This is why Buddhists often meditate quite a bit and go on long retreats, is to really internalize this way of being. The word that we use to talk about this quality of being is equanimity, which is not grasping towards pleasurable sensations, not trying to make anything happen, but also not avoiding the discomfort, being fully open to all of our experience, whether it's painful or pleasurable. So I have a whole video on equanimity that gets into how we become more or less equanimous over time with our experience, that if we're practicing being open to experiences, then we can become more open over time. But if we shut down around experiences, if we're not equanimous, then that increases and we become more shut down over time. So it's really important to practice equanimity because it builds. We get better at it as we practice. And that's really the name of the game when it comes to Buddhism, is it's all about practice. There's this teaching that we live in delusion or illusion, that we're not really living in the real world. And to get into the real world, we need to practice. And Buddhism is very much about coming into the real world. It's getting out of our hopes, our dreams, our fantasies, and it's coming into what's actually happening right now. And that is easier said than done. It can be very difficult because we have so much avoidance. We have so much that doesn't want to be fully present with what we're experiencing. We have so many layers of defenses that we've built up through our whole lives. And this is really what psychology teaches and what I do in my psychotherapy practice, which is looking at how we resist being present. What are we avoiding? And how we've developed ways of coping through the world that then end up holding us back from being fully present with our experience. And these can become so ingrained in our being, it can take a lot of work to allow a safe space for these things to open up, to move through them, to process them. And through that processing, through that being present and open to all of the experiences that we've previously been avoiding and carrying around with us, we can then really start to open more and more. We can become more alive, more present with our whole lives. So again, check out my video on equanimity. I'll leave it in the description. That really gets into this topic, and I think it's one of the most valuable ideas in Buddhism that we can start to implement right away. So I think some of the other really important ideas in Buddhism are what's called the 3 marks of existence. These 3 things that are eternally true, that we have to work to internalize because we don't perceive them as being true. So the first one is impermanence, that everything comes to an end. And this is something that we really don't like looking at as humans, that our lives are going to come to an end. In Western culture right now, this is really avoided. We really hide death. In Buddhist cultures, they often contemplate death in a very real way. One of the practices is going to places where they bring the dead bodies and to look at them and to say, hey, that person was alive and now they are dead, and that will be me one day. And this may seem kind of morbid, but it's really not about that. The lesson here is that we often have this feeling or have this sense that we're going to be here forever. We're not really facing our finite nature. We're not really looking at the fact that our life is going to end. And then by doing so, we don't use our time appropriately. We tend to kind of waste time. We don't take things seriously. And that by contemplating our death, contemplating that this life is going to end, that we have a finite amount of time, we can realize the preciousness of this life, that we need to really examine our values and how we spend our time. And the idea is that this can help motivate us to practice, to become better so we can help others. And a big idea in Buddhism as well is that we have to really learn how to help ourselves and see things clearly before we can help others. That if we try to help others before we've really come to a clear understanding and view of ourselves in the world, that we might end up doing them more harm. That through trying to help them, we might actually increase their suffering in the long run. So it's kind of like putting the oxygen mask on yourself on the plane before you put it on somebody else. If we're just kind of frantically running around doing what we think others need, we might not really be attuned to what they need. And in Buddhism, the whole teaching is what people need is truth. It's coming into reality. It's seeing things as they actually are. And through these practices, through meditation and Buddhist psychology and philosophy, we can start to see things more as they are and not as we want them to be. And then we can start to act in relationship to how things are, as opposed to living in a projected world, which is essentially how we live. And now there's a lot of science backing this up, that we project our reality. We don't live in the real world. Our brain literally constructs the reality around us. And the idea of meditation, especially like the meditation that Buddhism teaches, is seeing the world as it is. It's getting through these projections. It's not allowing our mind to create the world, but by actually coming more into the world. And this brings us to this big Buddhist idea of enlightenment, awakening to the true nature of reality. And this is maybe a weird kind of idea. Maybe science hasn't fully validated this, but now there's actually a lot of experiments going on, and Shinzen Young is a part of a lot of these, looking at how the brain changes in long-term meditators. And there's very real ways in which long-term meditators perceive the world differently. And this is true in an anecdotal sense if they share their experience, but also now we can do brain scans and see that yes, their brains are actually different. The weird thing about talking about enlightenment and awakening is that everyone who's gotten there has said the same thing, that you can't put it into words. You can write poetry or find some words that kind of point in the direction, but ultimately on some level, the words are also misleading because they just lead to more concepts. And awakening is really getting beyond all concepts, all projections, all mind. It's actually being fully in this world in an undivided way. And this kind of brings us to another aspect of Buddhism, which is no self. The teaching that the self doesn't exist as we perceive it to be. And this is often misunderstood. People think, oh, like I don't exist. And it's not that you don't exist, it's that you don't exist in the way that you feel yourself to exist. That the brain constructs this idea of the self, and that's not really how we exist. So all the long-term meditators say this idea of me, of who they think that they are, changes and becomes less rigid and less fixed and more fluid and less identified with this and more just with all of this. This also kind of connects to what a lot of Christian mystics say, a lot of other advanced kind of religious practitioners, people like Rumi will talk about this non-centered way of being, and that we are all truly a part of everything in a very undivided way. And it's not just an idea, but they have a real lived experience of it. And that's the important thing, is that you can glimpse into this interconnection with the entire universe. And everyone who does says it's really beyond words. It's really not something that can be explained, but it is something so overwhelmingly beautiful and powerful and profound that it really changes people, how they are, how they behave, and it makes people really generous and kind for the most part. It motivates people to want to share it with others, to want to help others get to that place of what we might call non-dual awareness. It's a state of consciousness beyond the self, beyond the ego. It's really difficult to talk about, but it's at least worth considering that there's a way of being, a way of experiencing the world that's completely different than what we're experiencing now. So I mentioned impermanence and no self as these two marks of existence, these two truths of reality that we need to kind of contemplate and internalize through practice. And the third mark of existence we actually talked about earlier is suffering. It's realizing that suffering is a fact of life, that in some ways it's inescapable. And it's the acceptance and the surrender to the suffering. The paradox is that to escape suffering, we have to accept it fully. And that's no easy deed. It's definitely a practice. I'll mention one other big idea in Buddhism that you've probably heard about before, which is karma. And people think of karma as this kind of scorekeeping around good and bad. It's like, oh, I did something good and therefore now I have this kind of good score and good things will happen, versus I did something bad and now bad things will happen. And my understanding of karma is a little bit different, and it's more something that we carry with us. It's more this idea that when we do something that's bad, a part of us knows that it's bad, that there is always this kind of higher self, you might call it, this part of ourselves that really truly knows what's best for us and what's best for others, and we often don't listen to it. We often do things that are selfish, that are harmful to others, and as a result, we carry this burden that's like, oh no, we know we did something bad, and it just kind of spirals out. When you carry this burden of, I did something bad, I'm a bad person, it influences our behavior, it influences our decisions, it influences the people we choose to hang out with. And so we kind of spiral out in these negative ways, in these harmful ways. And what we want to do is we want to start to challenge these ideas to look at, okay, well, what is really good? What do I really know is the best thing for me? It can be difficult to tell what's helpful or good for us or not if we're caught up in a divisive mindset. If we look at, okay, these people are bad and wrong and these people are good, and I'm gonna stand with these good people and stand against these other bad people. Buddhism really teaches about transcending this judgment that we have, transcending this division, because when we divide in the outer world, say these people are bad, these people are good, we divide in ourselves. We divide, okay, this part of me is good, this part of me is bad. And this is why Buddhism teaches universal compassion, which is, again, easier said than done, that we should strive to see everybody in a compassionate light, even if it's difficult. To see that everybody is plagued by ignorance, that everybody's plagued by fear, that everybody is just trying to alleviate their suffering. We're all just trying to escape the pain and confusion of life and trying to find some aspect of security. And this is just a normal way of being, and yet we all do it different, and then we pass judgment. Oh, I aligned with these kinds of good ways of being. I found my security in this good way. Other people did it in a bad way that's like more harmful. So it's seeing that this is just the nature of humanity, and this is the pain we're in which in Buddhism they call it Samsara, which is cyclic existence, which is so long as we see the world in this divided way, in this good and bad way, we're going to keep this cycle of suffering going. And that the only way to escape the cycle of suffering is to really accept things fully as they are, without judgment, and to really be compassionate across the entire spectrum of being and everything, right? And again, this is easier said than done, and our own inner parts are going to come up with resistance. And I think that in this psychological view, it's really valuable to look at where we're triggered, what is activating us, where do we resist being compassionate to another, and to really explore these things in depth. Now, of course, this is not easy. It takes a lot of practice, exploration, confronting parts of ourselves that we might not like, confronting parts of the world that we might not like. But the teaching is that if we hold hate or anger towards others, we're only really hurting ourselves. It's only creating more inner divisiveness, inner pain and conflict, and that it's actually very possible to come to a universally compassionate view if we really do look and really do acknowledge the universal suffering of the world. It's a lot easier to be compassionate towards others, even if we don't agree with their actions. It doesn't mean we have to agree with their actions or validate them or anything like that. It just means that we're a little bit more understanding around their pain. So these are some really big ideas with a lot of implications, and also a lot of space for misinterpretation or people using the ideas to justify their own actions. So this is why it's important to really be an ardent studier, to really look towards others who have more experience and to really question, are we really implementing these practices and these ideas in the way that is helpful for us, helpful for others, helpful for the world, or are we using it to justify a certain way of being or selfishness? Because Buddhism is very much about overcoming selfishness. It's seeing that self-serving behavior, self-serving attitudes only lead to more suffering. That the more we care about others, the more we care about their well-being, their happiness, the happier we become. And this is one of the beautiful aspects, is that the practicing compassion towards others makes us happier. It's really beautiful. And I think it's really difficult that we have so much struggle in the world. So many people are struggling financially, struggling in so many ways with anxiety, depression, all these challenges that we have. And we don't feel like other people are caring for us. We don't feel like there's this huge support system. And so we think, I need to care for myself. And while this is good, while we do need to care for ourselves, it can also really be helpful to care for others, or at least care about others. We may not have the resources to care for them, but to even just sit and practice goodwill, practice wishing others to be happy, can really make ourselves feel a lot better, which is one of the foundational practices of Buddhism, is practicing compassion, practicing wishing others to be happy, to be safe, and for them not to suffer. Okay, so really a lot of ideas that I just kind of threw out, but this is like a very brief and general introduction to what I feel are the most important or relevant ideas in Buddhism that we can start to contemplate, that can kind of open our minds, open our hearts, and help make our lives better. Because that's really what it's all about. It's about less suffering, not just for ourselves, but for everybody. So if you found this helpful, I have a lot of other videos on my channel along these lines around how to practice a lot of these things, because really it's all about practicing these things. So if you're interested, check out my other videos, subscribe to the channel, comment any questions or any disagreements or anything else that you might feel is relevant. And thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it.